Hi, welcome to the garage. I'm David Schoneman. Have you ever wondered about taking a pile of rusty, old, vintage motorcycle parts like this and making them into something like this? We're going to show you how. Stay with us. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the garage. You're watching Schoneman's Garage, and I'm David Schoneman. And we are in what I believe is episode 11 of our custom motorcycle project show that we've been doing really for over a year now, I believe. We started this project in the winter, last winter. Now we're in the middle of winter here in 2024 to 2025. And we're at this for quite some time. But we finally now, in episode 11, have our completed motorcycle. In the beginning of the show, we started with a workbench that was clean except for a bunch of motorcycle parts that we had lying around the shop. We had frame and engine and transmission and wheels and swing arms and all kinds of things that would otherwise have just been sold on eBay. And I thought, why not put together a bike, see if we can put together a bike out of everything we have here. And we have. So I hope you've been following along and you've seen all the steps that we've taken to build this motorcycle. We've talked a lot about what the ultimate bike was going to look like, what the design was going to be. We selected handlebars, we talked about seats, we talked about exhaust, wheels, brakes, everything. And we also talked about tank color. And if you remember way back when, I talked about doing a two-tone tank with red and white. And as you can see, it's not a two-tone tank, and it's certainly neither red nor white. We have a very brilliant orange here. I hope the camera and the TV and the YouTube, whatnot, does it justice, but it's a wonderful color. This tank was painted by Vernon McKay of Vern's Auto Body in Merrimack. He's a neighbor of mine. He paints all my tanks, and he did a fantastic job on it. And I chose the color from some sample books that he had that I think is now the most notable feature on this bike. It's a beautiful, beautiful color. And but you notice it's not red or white. And that's because as we do these projects, we think about them, think. And as we imagine what the final form is going to look like, oftentimes things change. And in this case, for the tank, it certainly did change. It's not a two-tone tank. I wanted to do two-tone. I thought about doing two-tone because it would make the tank look a little smaller. But the tank doesn't, I don't think the size is an issue. It's less of an issue than I thought it was going to be. But the colors, all the colors together, were chosen very carefully in the end. So we went with the orange, but the rest of the bike is pretty neutral. You see a lot of gray and silver, some black. Even the seat is gray. The exhaust is gray steel. We have a lot of bare metal showing, whether it's the engine case, which is aluminum, or the steel exhaust, or the carburetors, or whatnot. And the whole idea is to make everything neutral, so in this case, we can showcase this tank. I want all attention to be focused back to the tank. The bike is complete. We'll take a walk through it from front to back and around both sides, and you can see what it's like, and then we'll talk about plans for the future. So we've got the snowflake wheels. We talked about those in the past. We got the snowflake wheels with our vintage tires mounted. On the front end here, we have brand new Brembo rotors. There were no rotors here in the garage, so we had to go out and source them. And rather than buying used, I decided to buy new because we want the bike to go, certainly, but we also want it to stop. And Brembo brakes are really, I think, the best in the business. So we got two brand new Brembo rotors. We got rebuilt Brembo calipers. We got a brand new Brembo master cylinder up top. And of course, brand new brake lines. I got these custom made from Spiegler. Does a fantastic job. And they're exactly the right length, exactly the right color. You can choose all that stuff. And I've got all that done. We got a brand new headlight bucket, also from Spiegler. This is a German headlight bucket. I had this lying around the shop because it was purchased for another project and it turned out to be too large for that bike. So we bought another one, a smaller one. And this was a part that was lying around the shop. We had, we bought these from a company called Speed Moto Co. They're custom made headlight brackets. And then things like turn signals here are purchased on Amazon or eBay or whatever site might be available. Lots of them available. The handlebar is brand new. It's also German. It's not from BMW, but it is a German bar. It's aluminum. Nice lightweight, but very strong. And that's also from Spiegler. We've got Tomaselli throttle body, Tomaselli grips. It's nice, I think, not to use generic stuff. If you have to buy something, don't go generic. Buy quality, because the bike or whatever project you're doing is going to be sort of limited either by aesthetics or by functionality and reliability to your least, I won't say least expensive component, but it's going to be to the lowest quality component. And we don't want to have a fantastic bike and then put a cheap throttle on it, or cheap switches, or cheap electronics. You want to do it all quality if you at all can. It's a budget consideration, certainly, but I think in the end, you're going to be happier with your project. It's going to last longer and be reliable for far longer if you do it right. We've got a custom-made tachometer. We've got the BMW logo in here, and we've got our indicator lights, oil pressure and neutral, high beam, left and right turn signal indicator lights built into a custom bracket that I made here in the shop. Under the tank, we have all the electronics. You'll note that every place else, you don't see too many wires. Everything is very clean. And when you're doing a custom bike, I think it's great to get rid of the side covers and to expose all that open space around the motor. That way you're showcasing the technology of the bike, not just the wires and the switches and whatnot. You're showcasing the engine, drivetrain, tank, exhaust, whatever the major components are that you want to emphasize. And typically we don't want to emphasize the wiring. So wiring is hidden inside the frame wherever possible, or under the tank. In this case, you saw it on an earlier episode. We have our 3 lithium-ion batteries right about here under the tank, and on top of the tube, the main tube, top frame tube, under the tank, we have the Moto Gadget M unit, which is the brains of all the electronic systems that are on the bike. Back here on this side of the bike, it would be right here on this side, if you could see it, but we only can see one side, is the key switch. I've got a barrel key. Again, I had this key and ignition switch lying around the shop. I thought may as well put it to use, and we can turn it on and everything works on the bike. We've got our headlight control over here on the top. Maybe you can see the headlight coming on and off. We've got left turn signal and right turn signal. Here's the right turn signal on the front and the right on the rear. And that's all controlled via the M unit by push buttons. I can turn them on or off by the same button. They're also set to a timer so that if I forget as a rider to turn them off, I'm not driving down a road for 10 miles with my turn signal flashing. I'm sure you've seen a motorcyclist do that. It's not because they're not thinking, they just forget and they're unaware. There's no clicking sound to hear like there would be in a car. And the indicators are usually down low on a bike, not up high on the panel like they would be in a car, so it's a little harder to see. So these turn signals will turn off after 20 seconds if I forget to turn them off manually. But I can turn them on and I can turn them off. On this side over here, we've got 2 buttons. We've got a button that will start the motor. We're not going to do that today. And we've got a horn, very loud, pretty loud. So, and we got a brake light back here that functions, that comes on right away. And I've set it so that it will flash. Maybe you can see that when I hit the brakes. It's a bright light, but it's small for aesthetics, and we want to make sure that the driver behind us can see us. The seat. I just finished the seat the other day. The seat, it's cold in the garage here today. You can see it's pretty firm. We talked about that with the memory foam that I was going to be using, and I did use. The seat pan, you saw the seat pan on an earlier episode. It's aluminum. It's 3/16. I think it's 3/16. Maybe it's 5/32 aluminum pan that is bent to follow the contour of the frame so that the pan can lie flush to the frame, but I wanted the top of the seat to be flat. So I did several layers of foam in here, and I built up a section to take up the gap as the frame changed, as the seat pan changed angle. So we've got a flat top seat. The top of the seat is flat. Continue the line, a nice, clean, straight line. It's parallel to the exhaust. A nice, clean line on top, but necessarily changing thicknesses so that it can follow the shape of the pan below. And I made it up to the tank as neatly as possible. This is vinyl, purchased locally here over the memory foam. When this gets warm, this will be much softer. I can push into it, but right now it's pretty cold, so it'll take a while. But when you sit on it, the heat in your seat will cause it to warm up, and it will conform to you. So as motorcycle seats go, which are really not very comfortable, this one I think is going to be on the more comfortable side. It's just a vinyl. It's not marine grade, but it can stand to get a little bit wet, but we're not gonna ride the bike in the rain. Don't plan on riding it in the rain anyway. You never do, I suppose, but this bike is always going to be garaged as a custom bike, and it's fine to have the vinyl seat here, even though it's not like marine grade vinyl. We have the engine down below. We talked about the engine a lot. This is a fresh engine. It came with the frame, and the frame and engine together was a 750cc motorcycle, R75/7. /7 was kind of the iteration, the model of the R75s. But this one has been overhauled, and with these motors, the BMW motors, they're modular. You can pop the cylinders off, use the same crank and connecting rods, and you can put on new pistons and cylinders, and you can change the displacement. So this engine has been built up to a 1,000cc engine, so it'll have more power than the original 750 did. We've got a 5-speed transmission behind that. We talked about that before. And then we have the rear seat frame and the swing arm and the shocks. I talked about the gas cap. Let's go back to the gas tank for a moment. I said there are things that you can do later in the project as the budget allows. And I talked about using the original gas cap, just black plastic. And in the end, when I put the black plastic cap on here, I thought it's not doing the tank justice. I knew what kind of cap I wanted to get, and rather than wait and ride it and see how it looked, I just went ahead and bought it. This is machined aluminum. It goes into the same threads on the tank. This is made by a company called Motone, and it fits right in here. It's all billet machined aluminum, and I think it adds a nice element to the design. You have to have a gas cap, so it's got to look like something, and the black plastic, I don't think, cut it the same way. Coming around, we have the custom license plate bracket. It's mounted on there. We saw it on a previous episode on the other side. It's connected to the lower shock mount on the left side of the bike and to the axle. The axle does not rotate. The axle goes through the wheel. The axle itself doesn't rotate, but the wheel rotates on it. So you can use the axle as a mounting point for something like a license plate bracket here. And then we come around the other side. I think the second most distinctive feature on this bike after the tank, which I really love that tank. After the tank, we have a custom exhaust. This is made from mild steel. I made it here in the shop. I had much of the steel already. I had to buy some of it. I didn't have quite the length that I needed, but I had a kit that was for a different bike, but it happened to be the same diameter of exhaust pipe. I had a kit for another bike that we just didn't use. I think it was a bike that a customer wanted, and they changed their mind on it. We decided not to do a custom exhaust on it. And so we had the kit lying around, and the kit contains pieces like this, curved pieces that are bent on a mandrel bender. If you go to a local muffler shop, they'll put a pipe into a bender and it'll just kind of crimp it. It'll be a crimp bent. And you'll see the 1.5 tube, then you're going to see that it's smaller around the bend, then it gets bigger again when you get back to the straight length. And I didn't want that because a car exhaust, it's all underneath. You don't see it. You don't care what it looks like. Sometimes they're actually crinkled on the inside of the radius. You don't care about that on the bottom of your car, but you do care about it on a motorcycle. So all of these pieces were mandrel bent. And then they come with arms of standard length. And then what we do is we fit them together. We cut them the length that we need. We kind of map out where we want the exhaust to go. And then we weld the pieces together. You can see a couple of welds here and here. So the pipe on the other side, it goes out forward a little bit like this one does, but then it angles up to this height so that it stays well clear of the wheel through all the suspension travel and through the turns. It also stays clear of the brake lines here, because of course the pipe is going to be hot and we don't want to melt anything, or we certainly don't want the tire ever touching the exhaust. Not so much for melting purposes, but it's going to cause the bike to, for that moment, become very unstable. So we don't want that. So we got the custom-made exhaust, and you can see the pipes here are darker in the front and lighter in the back. When I showed you these pipes before, they were all the same color, all a silver color, the entire length. That's because at that time we had not yet run the engine. So I have run this engine only in the garage here. Haven't ridden it yet, but I have run the engine, and you see some discoloration here in the front and still shiny here in the back. Here you can see the welds a lot more clearly. I like that you can see the welds. I think the welds look cool. Here they're kind of blending into the discoloration of the metal. Now some of that discoloration I think could come off with a little Scotch-Brite pad. I'm not sure what I want to do with that. Again, I like metal. I like what happens to it naturally aside from rust. So if it changes color with heat, I just think that's interesting too, because we're talking about this bike. One of the aesthetic goals was to focus on the technology and the metal and just what's happening. Let it do what it's going to do without the clutter of a lot of the other things that motorcycles come with. I made some heat shields here because here's the foot peg. The pipes on the BMW normally go under the cylinders on each side and come up underneath the pegs. So you don't have a leg close to the pipes here. Because of the aesthetic, we're going to have a leg close to the pipe. And when I sit here, my knee is here and my calf goes right down through here. And I made some heat shields to protect me a little bit. I'm not going to ride this bike in shorts. It's going to be a little too dangerous for that. To hopefully keep the heat away. Also, this bike is set up for a single rider, solo rider. There are two different seat pans available and wheelbases available for the BMWs. I went with a long wheelbase swing arm because you get more stability when you ride, but I went with a shorter wheelbase seat frame. Now, the seat frames are interchangeable. It just means that this seat frame is a little bit shorter than a long wheelbase seat frame would be. And my plan was never for this to be ridden with a passenger. It could. I mean, the suspension can handle it, the bike can handle it, but a custom bike like this, I was just expecting it would be a solo rider. So there's no rear seat foot pegs. They would normally go here. I did not install any. So we have all new fluids, of course. We reused the shocks because we had them in the shop, and we reused a swing arm. We got new rubber pieces wherever necessary because they hold back oil. We want to make sure we have good seals and we're not dripping anything on the ground. There are no drips on this bike. We come next to the carburetors. The carburetors, I had carburetors for the 750cc version of this motor. The Bing carburetor, the German carburetors, I have some. They're fine carburetors. But with the 1000cc cylinders, you want to have, and heads, you want to have a 40 millimeter carburetor. That's a large Bing carburetor, and they're hard to find. I don't have any. They're very expensive if you can find them. They're all generally old. They have to be rebuilt anyway. And many people say that you actually get more. I believe you do get more power out of the Mikunis. Mikunis use a different technology. The Bing is, it's called the CV carburetor, constant velocity. I was going to talk about carburetors and do a show on carburetors. I may do that in the future. We haven't done it yet. But the CV carburetor has a slide in it, and the slide moves up and down to allow more air in, but that slide is actuated by a rubber diaphragm. And that rubber diaphragm enables the motorcycle to adapt to changes in ambient air pressure. You have changes in ambient air pressure with temperature, and you have changes with elevation. So the CV carburetor, the Bing carburetor, CV carburetor, and not just Bing CVs, there's Japanese CVs also, constant velocity carburetors. They're able to to adjust themselves to changes in temperature and changes in elevation if you were to ride up Mount Washington or something like that, or ride out west. Without having to manually adjust the carburetor, will automatically kind of adjust because it reacts to local air pressure, and that makes the difference. But you don't get as much power out of those. They're a little softer on the throttle response. They're more adaptable, but you always pay a price, and the price you pay is that you don't have the quickness of response that you might like to have. I would imagine that, I've never raced motorcycles, but if you were going to race motorcycles, you probably would not want a CV carburetor. You'd want something like the Mikuni. Now, this carburetor has a slide also, but the slide is manually operated by the throttle. As soon as you turn the throttle, the slide in there moves up to allow more fuel and air to rush into the cylinder. It requires more careful tuning, and if there's a big temperature change, let's say I ran this bike in August on a 100-degree day and it ran well, and today is 20 degrees outside, it would be hard to start and probably wouldn't idle well at all. A CV carburetor would. You can run it at 100 degrees and you can run it at 20 degrees and it'll operate fine in both environments. Again, not as much power out of it. But we went with the flat slides. Flat slide Mikuni racing carburetor on here. We needed carburetors anyway, and rather than buy the Bing, I decided to go with Mikuni flat slides. So a lot more power, more responsiveness, a little more care required when I tune it, but we get better response, and it costs less than trying to source two 40-millimeter Bings and then rebuild them. So we've run the engine, and the carbs are tuned well enough right now. The mixture is still kind of rich, but it runs well enough for it to idle, and I think it runs well enough for it to be ridden. So really the next step with the carburetors will happen on a decent day in the 50s at least, maybe into the 60s in the spring when there's no water on the road and all the snow and salt especially, has been rinsed off by some good rain. We'll take it out on the road and we'll run it, and then we'll make some adjustments to the carburetors. To make the adjustments on the carburetors, we have to pull the float bowl off, and we change the jets, which are accessible through the bottom. The main jet, and more importantly, the pilot jet, which controls the flow of fuel at lower power settings. And we want to make sure we get that right, then we'll work up to the main jet. But the engine has run. It runs great, smooth, and we'll ride it in the spring, and then we'll tune the carburetors. One issue I came across with the high exhaust, aside from position of my leg, is you can see where the fuel valve is here. That fuel valve is very close to the exhaust pipe, and we don't mind the fuel getting hot in the cylinders, but we don't like it getting hot elsewhere. So I've got the heat shield, the big heat shield. I've got another heat shield here just to kind of take some of that heat away, and I've also wrapped the pipe in some insulating exhaust wrap, fiberglass wrap, so that hopefully this section here will just be a little bit cooler than the section up here and the section back here. And the valve itself touches this piece of sheet metal, but the piece of sheet metal does not touch the exhaust. So if you have contact, you're going to have more heat. But if you have a little bit of airflow through there, then I think you're going to be okay. One thing that I plan to do is not to start this motor and let it idle and idle and idle to warm up. It's going to develop too much heat. Once it comes off the choke, my plan would be to start riding it right away so that we don't build up too much heat in here. Now I've got a heat sensor probe tool that I can use. When I come back from a ride, I'll check to see what the heat is like. My thought, though, is because we have two fuel valves, one on each side, and there's a crossover between the two lines. So either valve can serve both carburetors. So I don't need to have them both on. I can have one on or the other. And my plan is to use this valve rather than the other one. And the thinking behind that is that there's fuel in the tank that's going to be ambient temperature, much cooler than that exhaust. And as that fuel flows through this valve and down through this line, that temperature of the fuel will actually provide some cooling to this section here, and I think will be better and safer. Again, we're going to test it all and see how it goes to make sure it's okay. If it's still too hot, or if it is too hot, I think what I would have to do is to maybe cap this off and only use the other valve. I'll have to come up with some other plan. I've seen people do the high side pipes, and they actually put on a different tank. This tank, it's a nice big tank, but it drops down lower, and when it drops down lower, it ends up with the fuel valve being kind of close to the exhaust there. If you do the high pipe. If you had the low pipe, it wouldn't be a factor. So that's going to be kind of an experiment. We can't model that. I don't know how to model that with the computer or whatnot to say, this many degrees for this long on this kind of a day. What's the temperature likely to be? We're going to do it by trial and error. And like I say, we're going to start the bike up, ride it so we get airflow immediately, and then go for a short ride around the block or so, maybe a mile or two, a big block, and then come back and test the temperature. Maybe let it sit for a little while. As it sits and the engine cools down, this will likely get hotter because the engine and the pipe are, even though they're not generating any more heat, they're going to be giving off that heat, and it's not going to be giving off the heat into cold airflow. It's going to be giving off the heat into stagnant air, so that heat will rise. So we're going to test that very carefully. We have under the front engine cover here, going back to the electronics, we have all new electronic ignition. So we don't have the points anymore. We don't have the old wiring harness. We've basically taken an old bike and we've updated it with most of the things that we had around. I had the batteries, I had the M unit, things we had in the shop that would otherwise be disposed of in some way. We decided to put them into a bike. So that's our motorcycle. And I'm looking forward to riding it. I think it's going to be a great ride. I've sat on the bike numerous times. The length to the handlebars that we fit earlier is comfortable for me, for someone my size. And the seat, I think, will conform nicely. The fit of the handlebars and the angle of the controls, all that can be adjusted later, but it feels pretty good for now. And I think that with that orange tank, it's going to be an easily seen and recognized bike. An unusual color. These custom bikes are unique, and that's one of the goals we're going for, is to have a motorcycle that's unique. And I may have said it in the past, but I have another BMW Enduro over here. It's a 2013. I bought it new. It's a nice bike, but they're far more common. And I can ride that motorcycle, stop at a coffee shop somewhere, and someone may say, oh, that's interesting. What year's your bike? May chit-chat a little bit. Many other bikes, they're not remarkable. This bike and any of the custom bikes that I have, being unique as they are, I can park in front of a coffee shop and have my cup of coffee sitting there on the sidewalk on a nice warm summer day, and inevitably I'm going to have all kinds of conversations about the bike. And that's fun. So if you have a chance to build a bike, or you have an old bike and you want to get it going, I would encourage you to do it, because there's a social aspect to it that's really, I think, a lot of fun. It's fun talking to folks, and this will give you the opportunity to do that. So that's our bike. I hope you've enjoyed it. I think it's been fun for me, and I have heard from some viewers. I've got some interesting stories to tell you next time, and that raises the question, what comes next? Is there a next time? We finished our project. I love projects. You start with an idea, you make a plan, you execute the plan, and it's done. You can do something else. You go read a book, whatever you want to do. Or if you're like me, you think, that was really great. I like working with my hands. It was fun designing a project. Next time, I think I want to do X or Y instead of what we did for whatever reason. We talked about the spoke wheels. I really like spoke wheels. We couldn't use them on this, but I still have those spoke wheels, and it makes me think maybe someday we'll do another project with spoked wheels. So I think we're going to keep the show going. We have another project coming up. You can just barely see it in the frame here. I picked up an old Yamaha. This is a 1980 Yamaha. I've got 2 frames, 2 sets of wheels, and a couple of tanks, and we're going to build that up with some interesting ideas. But even before we get to that, I heard from a viewer which I'll tell you more about next time. But we got another project as a result of doing these shows and doing these YouTube videos that I think you'll be interested to see. So that's our project. If you have any questions or comments, or you want to stop by the shop sometime to sit around and talk about bikes, I picked up another little hobby too, and that's we're now roasting our own coffee right here in the garage. So we got motorcycles and caffeine going on here in the garage. You want to come by for a cup of coffee or something and to sit around and talk about your old bike or these old bikes or whatever, I'd be very glad to have you. Just send me a message. If you have any ideas for projects, what you'd like to see, let me know that as well. And if you enjoyed the show or you think there could be some improvements, please let me know. We're always trying to improve things, whether it's a bike or a presentation about a bike. So that's our show. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope that you'll watch again next time because, like I said, there's something else coming up. You can see the bench. I said in the beginning that we started with the clean bench. We're not going to see a clean bench until the end. Well, it's not a clean bench today. I got barely enough room for my coffee cup there. But that's because we've already begun a couple of other projects here in the garage. And it's not clean because what's going on here is for the next project already. So we'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in. Let me know if you have any ideas or questions. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.